The same thing is probably going to be true in Africa after deportation of those from the West back to Africa. And, that's the merciful outcome, right?
Yeah, if
Deportation
that
is the
happens.
alternative to war.
Before we get into it, what you're about to watch is the censored version of this episode. Increasingly, the algorithm is becoming more and more hostile to the type of content I want to deliver. This is a fully independent channel which is contending with the real world issues. If you'd like to support me and keep these talks alive, please head over to the Substack, where here and only here you'll find the full uncensored video, along with live Q&As, a chance to speak to some of the biggest voices in this space, and building a community of like-minded people. I'll leave a link in the description. Please be sure to check it out. Anyways, enough from me. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. With this curse of Ham, to have foreigners within your nation, am I right in saying you see this as a curse
Yes.
curse to God? So
Scripture is very clear about that in many, many places. That's all throughout the Old Testament, that having foreigners in your land is a curse.
Right. So where does that leave like mixed race people? Because I can see that there's an issue, and this is a curse, and like how do you go about fixing that problem?
It is very difficult for many of those who are mixed race. And generally speaking, the general rule that I've always given is that you have to pick a side, which is unfortunate, but it's the reality for those who are like, I don't have to pick a side. I'm mostly German and a little bit of Scottish. Like, I don't have to pick between German and Scottish. I'm just an American. That's pretty standard over here. So I'm not torn between two very different lineages. Those who are mixed race are. They know that no matter how much leftists and others and, right-wing boomers, supposedly right-wing, but how much they try to downplay it and say, oh, no, you're just perfect the way you are. And there's no, the person who's mixed race knows that everything is not right, that he has that internal conflict, that he feels like he doesn't really belong to any one group, because he doesn't. That's the reality of it. You have to pick. If you are half, Japanese and half French, you're going to have to pick which one you align yourself with, that one, and go all in on that. And then, your children are 3/4 whichever one you pick. And then obviously that halves every generation. After a while, and not that many generations, things like that become sort of family trivia. It's like, hey, we had a great, 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 great grandfather who was Japanese, right? Okay. You're 99.98% French at that point. So is that sort of ideal? No, because the initial pairing created a problem. But the best you can do is work with reality as you find it. Now, for some pairings, obviously, that's more of a problem, right? If you are half French and half African, we as Westerners can't permit that to stay in the gene pool in our nations, because that is too detrimental. Can they go and live in Africa then and sort of be the cream of the crop in their African country? Yes, they can certainly do that. Because by and large, those who, it's usually the warlord class in most African countries these days, but those who are actually running things in Africa usually have some European blood. So you can go over there and basically be their equivalent of nobility just because you have, 25% European blood. So a combination of picking your side and then obviously deportations is the solution.
Yeah. And, I have loads of friends who would fit into that category. And there is often, whenever I see, they're half white, half British, and they're half African or half Caribbean, because there has been such a subversion, it's not cool to be white. So like naturally more and more people reject that, and they embrace like, oh, their black side or whatever. And despite being the fact that they were born and raised in the UK, this country has given them, education, it's given them safety, it's given them well-being, they'll still turn around and shit over that culture despite and pair with the one which they don't really even know, which has done nothing for them. It's just so common.
It does seem to be the case, and it's also true in the U.S. context, although with some difference in nuance, because the anti-white propaganda over here hasn't been as intense for as long. It's certainly ramping up here. But most individuals who are half black do wind up siding with the black side. There are some rare exceptions, but they're definitely not the majority. They do usually side with it, which makes some sense because, like I just said, If you are half black, half white, and you're around blacks, you are head and shoulders above everyone else, right? You automatically wind up with a position of authority and respect to some degree because you are more capable than everyone around you. If you are instead among a bunch of whites, then you are less capable and you are going to find yourself at the bottom of the social hierarchy. So there's sort of a, not necessarily mercenary, but just, standard assessment of the reality. Like if I'm in group B, I'm the top of the pile. If I'm in group A, I'm the bottom of the pile. So they already
Yeah.
inherently have to make that choice. They're sort of making the rational choice.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily bad. They're sort of making the best of a bad situation.
Well, it's quite mixed, isn't it? Because we are probably the most accepting. We care the least about our race and therefore other races. And I can see this kind of curse playing out in the sense of often I see mixed race people, they feel like they can't fit in. And you're right, they do have to pick a side, but often, they go to the black community, they're too white to be black, and then they might see themselves as too black to be white. So like it does create this internal conflict.
Well, it's not a nice thing to say, but fundamentally the problem is that you have these individuals, they're the result of a pairing that was basically just lust. And it was someone acting on just base animalistic lust and usually a fetish of some kind, whether it's a fetish against your own people or for the foreign, for the alien, whatever it happens to be. And the result is, these children who are torn between two worlds. And it's because of their parents acting for their own selfish interest instead of acting in the interest of anything greater than themselves. And part of that, yes, it's the issue of we no longer teach people to be proud of their history and to love their own people and all these important things that you have those naturally, but they've sort of been beaten out of people with propaganda. And some people are more susceptible to propaganda than others, women, for instance. And that leads to a lot of these problems. But these individuals are going to have to find their place in the world. And I think to some degree, it's going to wind up with a little bit of something similar to the caste system in India, but in Africa, which you already have to some degree. Think South America. The caste system in South America, even if you don't want to call it that, they don't call it that, but it's very real. Mexico, for instance, if you are largely white Spanish, you're the upper end of the social hierarchy. If you are instead a mixture of black African and Amerindian, you're at the bottom. They have a caste system the same as India, and it's the same sort of caste system because the upper class, the upper caste in India has that Indo-European admixture, and that's why they're the upper caste. And then those who are the natives, the worst of the natives, are the untouchables. The same sort of caste system develops everywhere that you have this mixing of different ethnicities, this mixing of different races. The same thing is probably going to be true in Africa after deportation of those from the West back to Africa. And, that's the merciful outcome, right? Deportation is the alternative to war, because anytime you have different peoples living in the same land, that's just war that hasn't yet become an active war.
Right.
So the merciful option, the option that doesn't require any sort of bloodshed, is deportation, is to put people back as best we can in their own lands.
Yeah.
Which is what obviously those of us on the right want, no matter how the media and others may characterize us. The preferable outcome is the one that is the most peaceful, because a violent outcome is never desirable. Christians have a very clear theology on that. It's not impermissible to engage in warfare. There are times where warfare is moral or even required, but it is not the preferable outcome. God does not like war. God is the man who ends wars, and that's what he wants Christians to be as well. Blessed are the peacemakers. But it's not blessed are the peacemakers who make peace at the expense of everything else. It has to be a peace that is worth having, and sometimes that requires other steps before you get to the peace.
Yeah, this is the thing. And the example I always try and bring people back to is, what for one, we can see multiculturalism isn't working. we can see that there is like the tribal nature is so apparent. White people are finally waking up to this. But, look at Catholics v. Protestants in Ireland. Okay, this is the same peoples. This is the same religion, right? It's just two different sects. And yet that was enough to cause a civil war, which went on for 40 years. I mean, to a degree, there's still issues now, right?
Yes.
So what happens when you start not only different religions, different peoples, different ideas, atheists, there are so many divides in society. These things don't take much to spark. And the closer and closer society starts to break down, we're getting closer to that point. And yeah, you're right. Like, what has stood the test of time? It's everyone having their sovereign countries. It's having this mutual respect, having borders. Therefore, that there are, differences. We always used to understand that, but now we've lost track of that, it seems.
Even within individual nations, if you take the sort of, I guess, greater sense of it, there are immense regional differences. The U.S. is a great example of that, partly because we have different mixtures of European peoples here, right? Like I mentioned, we have more of the Germanic and the Scandinavian in the Midwest. We have significantly more English in the Northeast. There's more Scots-Irish or Ulster Scots, whatever you want to call them, in the South. Now there's more Irish as well. And then places like New York, you had Italians who moved here. Very real regional differences because of that. But even in countries that did not have that sort of mixture of European peoples, think of the UK. You have the Scots versus the Irish versus the British versus the Welsh. Even in Germany, the Bavarians, and at this point Prussia's gone, but people who live around Berlin, not exactly identical or interchangeable people. And that's even within one group of people. We used to recognize the regional differences. You don't solve these problems by shuffling everyone around and then seeing what happens, because we know what happens. It's war. And that was one of the tactics actually used historically by ancient empires to make people less unified so they were less likely to rebel. That's what happened to the 10 northern tribes in Israel. The Assyrians conquered them as punishment from God for being evil, as they basically were throughout all of history. And what the Assyrians would do when they conquered a people is they would take some of the people from that region, move them elsewhere in the empire, and take people from somewhere else in the empire and move them into the region. And they knew it would happen. That causes intermarriage, and you wind up with a people so miscegenated they no longer have an identity, and so they can't work well enough together to rebel against the empire. It was the whole reason they did it. Similar to what is happening today, although the overarching goal today is the extermination of whites, but it is also to create conditions so that people can't rebel, so they can't work together.
Why is it that you have such a strong stance on this? Because generally speaking, I don't see the rest of the church having this kind of attitude. They adopt very, very passive, love thy neighbor mentality, this universalism, we're all equal, which I would agree, but I would also say, I would agree in the sense that our souls are of equal value, but we are different peoples. We do need to be segregated for these very reasons. Why are you different? And why doesn't the church acknowledge that?
The modern church is not really, in most cases, the church anymore. The modern church is something that pays lip service to Christianity, but really only a handful of select verses instead of all the uncomfortable ones, because it's really a product of the post-war consensus.
So if you've made it this far, first of all, thanks very much. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're watching on Spotify, please be sure to give it a 5-star review. The full uncensored version of this episode can be found on Substack and Substack alone. Both YouTube and Spotify require censorship. However, Substack doesn't. With one YouTube already taken away, it's only a matter of time before it happens again. On top of that, with the Substack, we'll be doing live Q&As, talks with some of the biggest voices in this space, and a chance for you to ask the questions you want answering. Head over to Substack now for only £5 a month. I'll leave a link for this in the bio below. Cancel anytime. Thanks for watching this week's episode, and I hope to see you next time. All the best.